I stood in my driveway, rain soaking through my jacket as I stared at the bright red Rules for Alina list my mother had taped to my refrigerator in my own kitchen. 28 rules, typed in all caps, laminated for permanence. After 6 months of my parents living in my house temporarily, I had finally changed the locks while they were at church. Now they stood on the other side of my front door, their faces contorted with shock and outrage as they realized their keys no longer worked. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena Marie Wilson, open this door immediately. My father's voice boomed through the wooden door, the same authoritative tone he'd used throughout my childhood. The same tone he'd been using since they'd moved into my guest bedroom half a year ago, gradually transforming from grateful guests into household dictators. I clutched the house key in my palm so tightly that its edges bit into my skin. At 34 years old, standing on the porch of the home I had purchased with my own hard-earned money, I was finally reclaiming what was mine. The journey to this moment had been long and painful, but sometimes setting boundaries means being willing to change the locks. 6 months earlier, life had been blissfully quiet. I had settled into a comfortable routine in my Victorian-style home in Maplewood, a charming suburb with tree-lined streets and a tight-knit community feel. After years of saving while working as a software engineer, I had finally purchased my dream home, a 3-bedroom fixer-upper with character and potential. Over 2 years, I had lovingly restored the hardwood floors, updated the kitchen with granite countertops, and transformed the backyard into a peaceful retreat with a small vegetable garden and a reading nook beneath an old oak tree. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. After ending a 5-year relationship with Michael 3 years earlier, a man who had ultimately wanted me to give up my career ambitions to support his, I had embraced independence. I had good friends, a fulfilling job that allowed me to work remotely 3 days a week, and a home that reflected my personality in every carefully chosen detail. That peaceful existence shattered with a single phone call on a crisp autumn evening. I was curled up on my window seat with a mug of tea and the latest historical fiction novel from my book club when my phone lit up with my mother's name. Elena, it's happened. My mother's voice trembled on the line. Your father's been laid off. After 32 years at Grayson Manufacturing, they just let him go. Some corporate restructuring nonsense. No warning, just a cardboard box and 30 minutes to clear out his desk. My stomach dropped. Dad had been a production manager at the same company since before I was born. His identity was deeply entangled with his role there. He was Frank. From Grayson to everyone in our small hometown of Cedar Creek. I'm so sorry, Mom. That's terrible. How's Dad taking it? Not well. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He's barely speaking, just sits in his chair staring at the wall. But Elena? That's not all. I heard her take a deep breath. The timing couldn't be worse. We just got a letter from the bank. They're foreclosing on the house. What? How is that possible? My parents had lived in the same modest ranch-style home for over 35 years. Your father? She hesitated. He took out a second mortgage 3 years ago to invest in your cousin Robert's restaurant venture. You know how he's always believed in supporting family. When the restaurant failed last year, we started falling behind. We've been trying to catch up, but with this layoff, my mind raced. Why hadn't they told me about any of this? How much time do you have? 30 days. Her voice broke. Elena, I hate to ask this, but is there any way we could stay with you? Just temporarily until we get back on our feet. Your father's applying for jobs, and I could pick up more hours at the library. It wouldn't be for long, I promise. I hesitated, mental warning bells clanging loudly. My parents and I had always had a complicated relationship. They loved me, certainly, but they had never quite approved of my life choices. From my decision to study computer science instead of education, such an unfeminine field, dear, to my breakup with Michael, you're not getting any younger, Elena, to my purchase of a home without a husband, such a big responsibility for a single woman. But they were my parents, and they were in crisis. Of course you can stay with me, I heard myself say. I have the guest bedroom downstairs, and it has its own bathroom. You'll have privacy, and I work from home most days, so I can help with the transition. Oh, Elena. My mother's relief was palpable. You're an absolute lifesaver. We won't be any trouble at all. You won't even know we're there. Famous last words. The first few weeks were actually pleasant. My mother, Patricia Wilson, was a whirlwind of domestic energy, cooking elaborate meals, insisting on doing my laundry, though I had to hide my more intimate garments after finding my bras and underwear folded with military precision on my bed, and keeping the house spotless. My father, Frank, was quieter, spending hours searching for jobs online and taking long walks around the neighborhood. Your home is lovely, Elena, my mother remarked one evening as we shared a bottle of wine on the back porch. Though I'm surprised. You chose such dark cabinets for the kitchen. Lighter colors would make the space feel larger. I let the comment slide. It was minor, and she was being generous with her praise otherwise. Thanks, Mom. I'm happy with how it's turned out. And the neighborhood seems nice, though I noticed the Hendersons across the street have let their lawn go a bit. In Cedar Creek, the neighborhood association would never allow such neglect. I smiled tightly. The Andersons, actually, and Maplewood is a bit more relaxed about those things. Joe works long hours as an ER doctor, and Anita is managing their 3 kids mostly solo while he's pulling shifts. Still, curb appeal matters. First impressions count. She patted my hand. Maybe your father could offer to help with their yard work. He's always been good with landscaping. It was the first glimpse of what was to come, my parents' subtle but persistent attempts to reshape my life and home to match their expectations. At the time, I brushed it off as my mother's way of processing her displacement, of trying to establish some control in a situation where she felt powerless. By the 1-month mark, the dynamic had shifted. I came home from a rare day at the office to find my living room furniture rearranged. Mom? Dad? What happened in here? My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Oh, I hope you don't mind. The way you had the sofa positioned was blocking the natural flow of the room. This arrangement is much more conducive to conversation. Your father and I tested it out when Pastor Griffin came by for coffee this morning. I frowned. Pastor Griffin? From Cedar Creek? Yes, he was kind enough to drive up and check on us. I invited him for lunch. She beamed. I made my chicken. Casserole. There's plenty left if you're hungry. I wasn't hungry. I was irritated. This was my home, and they were inviting people over without even texting me. But again, I swallowed my frustration. They were going through a difficult transition. Flexibility was important. Next time, could you let me know if you're having guests? And maybe check with me before rearranging the furniture? Her smile faltered slightly. Of course, dear. I didn't think you'd mind. It's such a small thing, and it really does look better this way. I nodded and retreated to my bedroom, moving my laptop from my home office, which now featured several boxes of my parents' belongings that wouldn't fit in the guest room. Temporary storage, my father had called it as he stacked photo albums and holiday decorations against the wall where my yoga mat usually lay. 2 months into their stay, my father announced at dinner that he had secured a part-time position as a shift supervisor at a warehouse about 20 minutes away. It's not ideal, and the pay is less than half what I was making. But it's something. His voice carried a mix of relief and defeat. They want me to work evenings, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., 4 days a week. That's great, Dad, I said encouragingly. It's a start. The problem is transportation, he continued. with only one car between your mother and me, and her needing it during the day for job hunting and errands. I saw where this was, heading before he finished. You want to borrow my car on the days you work? It would be a tremendous help, Elena, just until we can save enough for a second vehicle. Your mother could drop me off on days when you need your car for the office. It was reasonable. It was family helping family. I agreed, with the condition that they respect my work schedule and give me advance notice when they needed the car on my office days. They readily agreed. Within a week, my mother had established a sign-out calendar for vehicle coordination on the refrigerator, with my name penciled in only for my designated office days. The other days, my car was automatically assigned to them, with detailed agendas of my mother's planned activities, grocery shopping, library shifts, church functions, hair appointments. Meanwhile, the guest bedroom had transformed. My parents had brought more belongings from storage. Family photos now lined the hallway. Their preferred brand of toilet paper replaced mine in all bathrooms. And my father's recliner from their old living room now occupied the corner of my family room where my desk had once stood. My mother had also taken over the kitchen entirely. My carefully organized system of meal planning and food preparation gave way to her traditional cooking. My containers of quinoa and flax seeds were pushed to the back of the pantry, replaced by white bread and potato chips. My almond milk disappeared, cow's milk taking its place. You always loved my cooking growing up, she reminded me when I mentioned missing my usual breakfast smoothie ingredients. All that health food is just marketing anyway. A good home-cooked meal is what the body really needs. 3 months in, I came home to find a typed list taped to the refrigerator. House guidelines for harmonious living. My mother stood nervously, nearby as I read through the 15 items. 1. Quiet hours begin at 9 p.m. on weeknights, 10 p.m. on weekends. 2. Television volume should be kept low enough not to be heard from bedrooms. 3. Dishes should be washed immediately after use, not left in the sink. 4. Last person to leave a room is responsible for turning off lights. 5. Thermostats should be set at 68 degrees in winter, 75 degrees in summer. 6. Laundry schedule. Elena. Saturday, Patricia and Frank. Tuesday and Thursday. The list continued, regulating everything from shower length to appropriate dinner times. It was as if I had been transported back to my teenage years, living under their roof and their rules. Mom, what is this? I tried to keep my tone neutral. Just a few guidelines to help us all coexist peacefully. She smiled brightly. Your father and I have noticed some inconsistencies in household management, and we thought this would help avoid any tension. Inconsistencies? This is my home. I've been managing it just fine for 2 years. Her smile tightened. Of course, dear. But now there are 3 adults sharing the space, and some standard expectations just make things easier. Your father is very sensitive to noise when he's trying to sleep before his shift, and I've noticed the electric bill was quite high last month. We're just trying to contribute by bringing some order. I wanted to argue, to remind her that they were guests, in my home, not co-owners, but the fragility behind her confident facade stopped me. My parents had lost almost everything: their home, my father's career and identity, their sense of security. This list was their attempt to establish some control, to create a semblance of the household authority they had lost. Let's discuss this later, I said finally, removing the list and placing it on the counter. I had a long day at work. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I texted my closest friend, Zoe. My parents have officially taken over. They made a rule list for my house. Her response came quickly. Red flag. Time for the exit strategy? They have nowhere else to go right now. Dad's only working part-time. What about their job searches? Any progress? I realized I hadn't heard my mother mention job applications in weeks. She'd had a few interviews at local libraries early on, but nothing recently. Instead, She'd been busier than ever with social activities, reconnecting with old friends, from Cedar Creek who lived within driving distance, joining the local garden club, volunteering at a nearby church. I'm not sure they're looking that hard anymore. They seem to be settling in. You need to have the talk. Set boundaries before they completely take over. I knew Zoe was right. The situation was already making me uncomfortable in my own home. I was tiptoeing around after 9 p.m., asking permission to adjust my own thermostat, and parking on the street because my parents' belongings had gradually filled the garage. But initiating that conversation felt impossible. How could I assert boundaries without seeming heartless to my displaced parents? The next morning, I steeled myself to broach the subject over breakfast, but before I could speak, my father announced gruffly, "That Bradford boy next door had his music playing until midnight. The bass was vibrating the walls." "Aiden," I corrected automatically. "He's a medical resident. He works odd hours and sometimes unwinds with music when he gets home. He's actually very considerate. That's the first time I've heard anything from his place in months." "Well, I spoke to him this morning," my father continued. "Told him that respectable people keep reasonable hours. He didn't seem to take it well." My stomach dropped. "You confronted my neighbor?" "Dad, I've lived next to Aiden for 2 years without issues. He's brought in my packages when I'm traveling, and he shoveled my walkway last winter when I had the flu." "You're too lenient, Elena." He folded his newspaper definitively. "Young men like that need clear boundaries." The irony of his statement about boundaries wasn't lost on me, but before I could respond, my mother interjected cheerfully. "I've invited the Johnsons over for dinner tonight. You remember Margaret and William from church? They're so excited to see the house." "Tonight?" I blinked. "Mom, I have a video call with the Singapore team at 7 p.m. It's a major client deployment." "Oh," she looked momentarily flustered, then brightened. "That's fine, dear. You can take your call in your bedroom. We'll keep the dinner conversation in the dining room." And just like that, I was being relegated to my bedroom in my own home. Something inside me snapped. "No," I said firmly. "I need the office for my call. It has my dual monitors and the proper lighting setup for professional video conferences. You'll need to reschedule your dinner." My mother's smile faltered. My father lowered his newspaper, his expression darkening. "Elena," he said in the tone that had always preceded punishment in my youth, "your mother has already invited them. It would be very rude to cancel last minute. Surely your work call can be adjusted." "This is my house," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. "And that office is my workspace. I have a professional obligation that was scheduled weeks ago. Your dinner plans don't take priority over my career." The temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop several degrees. My father's face reddened. "We have been nothing but accommodating since we arrived," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "We've helped maintain this house, cook meals, reduce wasteful spending. Your mother has created a proper home here, which it certainly wasn't before with your haphazard lifestyle. A little gratitude and flexibility would be appropriate." My mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Frank, Elena's job is important. We understand that." She turned to me with a tight smile. "We'll move dinner to tomorrow night. But Elena, please remember that family obligations are important too. Your father and I have given up a lot to be here." The guilt trip was expertly deployed, but for once, it didn't land. Instead, I felt a surge of clarity. This wasn't a temporary situation anymore. My parents weren't actively trying to improve their circumstances. They were restructuring my life to accommodate their permanent presence. "I need to get ready for work," I said, standing up from the table. "We should talk about the long-term plan this weekend. It's been 3 months, and we should discuss expectations going forward." As I left the kitchen, I heard my mother whisper to my father, "She's just stressed about work, Frank. She doesn't mean to be ungrateful." That evening, I returned from the office to find the house guidelines list back on the refrigerator, now expanded to 20 items. New additions included guests must be approved 48 hours in advance, and parking protocol, Elena's car on street, Patricia and Frank's car in garage for easier access. Over the next few weeks, the tension escalated. My attempts to discuss their job search and housing plans were repeatedly deflected or turned around on me. "We're still adjusting after our upheaval, Elena," my mother would say. "Your father's health isn't what it used to be. The stress of another move right now would be too much." Or my father would counter with, "Do you have any idea how difficult the job market is for someone my age? The part-time work is the best I can do right now." Meanwhile, the house guidelines continued to multiply, reaching 28 rules by month 5. My spaces continued to shrink. My beautiful home had become a battlefield of passive-aggressive notes, rearranged belongings, and unspoken resentment. The breaking point came on a rainy Sunday morning in April. I came downstairs to find an older woman with steel gray hair sitting at my kitchen table, a real estate brochure spread before her. "You must be Elena," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Barbara Winters, your parents' real estate agent. They've told me so much about you." I shook her hand automatically, my mind racing. "Real estate agent?" My mother bustled in from the living room. "Elena, I thought you were sleeping in." "Barbara just stopped by to show us some exciting possibilities." "Possibilities for what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My father entered, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Sit down, Elena. We have a proposition for you." I sat, a sense of dread building. "You know we've been considering our options," he began carefully. "And after much thought, we've decided the most sensible solution is to sell this house." "Sell my house?" I repeated incredulously. "Hear us out," my mother interjected. "This place is really too large for a single person. The upkeep, the expenses, it's impractical. Barbara has shown us some lovely condominiums that would be perfect for you. Modern, low maintenance, closer to your office. And the equity from this sale," my father continued, "would allow us to purchase a suitable home for ourselves, plus set aside a nest egg for our retirement. It's really the most practical solution for everyone." I stared at them, speechless. They weren't just planning to stay, they were planning to take my home entirely. Barbara smiled professionally. "The market in this area is excellent, right? Now, we could list next month and likely have offers within days. These character homes are in high demand. Get out." My voice was barely above a whisper. "Excuse me?" Barbara blinked. "Get out of my house, now." I stood up, hands trembling. "This meeting is over," my mother gasped. "Elena, don't be rude to Barbara. She's just trying to help." "No, she's trying to sell my house. The house I saved for years to buy. The house I renovated with my own hands. The house that is solely in my name." I turned to Barbara. "I apologize, but there has been a misunderstanding. This house is not for sale. It will never be for sale. Please leave immediately." Looking uncomfortable, Barbara gathered her materials. "I think I should give your family some privacy to discuss this." After she left, the storm broke. My father accused me of ingratitude and selfishness. My mother cried about family loyalty and their desperate situation. I reminded them of their promise that this arrangement was temporary. They countered that circumstances had changed. The argument lasted for hours, circling without resolution. Finally, exhausted, I retreated to my bedroom and locked the door. I texted Zoe. "They tried to sell my house today, without telling me." Her response was immediate. "I'm coming over. Pack their bags." The next morning, after a sleepless night, I called in sick to work and waited until my parents left for their Monday routine. My father to run errands before his afternoon shift. My mother to her garden club meeting. Then I drove to the hardware store in the neighboring town, where nobody would recognize me. "I need to change my locks," I told the locksmith section employee. All of them. Today. By noon, a locksmith had replaced every lock in my house. I packed my parents' essential belongings into 2 suitcases, placing them on the covered front porch, along with an envelope. Inside was a check covering 2 months' rent for a decent apartment, along with a list of available rentals in their price range that I had researched overnight. Then I waited in my car across the street, my heart pounding as their familiar blue sedan pulled into the driveway at 2:30 p.m. I watched as they discovered their keys no longer worked, as they found the suitcases and the envelope, as my father's face contorted with rage and my mother's crumpled in hurt. Only then did I drive forward, parking behind their car and stepping out into the rain that had begun to fall. And that's how I found myself standing in my driveway, rain soaking through my jacket, as my parents demanded I open my door and allow them back into my life on their terms. Elena Marie Wilson, my father's voice boomed again. You open this door right now. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, clutching my new house key like a talisman. No, I said, my voice clear and steady despite the rain and the turmoil. I won't open this door. Not today. Not until you understand that. This is my house, my life, and my rules. And in that moment, standing up to the parents who had always expected me to bend to their will, I felt something I hadn't experienced in the 6 months since they'd arrived. The strength that comes from reclaiming your own power, your own space, and your own story. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is change the locks on the doors that no longer serve you, whether they're physical doors or the emotional boundaries that protect your right to live on your own terms. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena, please. My mother's voice shifted from indignation to pleading as the rain intensified, plastering her carefully styled hair to her forehead. We can talk about this like reasonable adults. You don't need to make a scene in front of the neighbors. I glanced around the street. Sure enough, curtains twitched in windows across the way. Mrs. Patel from next door had stepped onto her porch, pretending to check her mailbox while watching our confrontation with unconcealed interest. In our 6 months together, my parents had managed to introduce themselves to every neighbor within a 3-block radius, presenting themselves as the responsible adults overseeing their single daughter's household. I'm not the one shouting, Mom, I replied calmly. And this isn't a negotiation. The letter explains everything. I gestured to the envelope my father now clutched in his white-knuckled grip. I've given you enough money for 2 months' rent on an apartment, plus a list of available rentals that would work with Dad's current income. I've packed your essential items, clothes, toiletries, medications. The rest of your belongings will be safely stored here until you have a permanent address. My father's face had progressed from red to purple. In all my 34 years, I had never directly challenged his authority like this. The Frank Wilson playbook had always been straightforward. He issued commands, and everyone in his orbit, especially his wife and daughter, complied. This is how you repay our sacrifices? He sputtered. Everything we've done for you, we raised you, educated you, supported you. And I'm grateful for that, I interrupted, surprised by my own steadiness. But I'm an adult now, with my own home and my own life. A life you were trying to take over completely. You weren't guests anymore. You were colonizers. My mother gasped at the word. Elena, how can you say such a thing? We were only trying to help organize. You were trying to sell my house out from under me, I said flatly, without even discussing it with me first. That's not helping. That's theft. A tense silence fell, broken only by the steady patter of rain on the driveway. My father's jaw worked silently, as if chewing on words too explosive to release. My mother's eyes filled with tears that mingled with the raindrops on her cheeks. Where are we supposed to go right now? She asked finally, her voice small. I had anticipated this question. I've booked you a room at the extended stay hotel on Riverside Drive. It's paid for 3 nights, which should give you enough time to secure one of the apartments on that list. Many of them offer same-day move-in with approved credit. My father opened the envelope with shaking hands, scanning the contents. His expression shifted from rage to disbelief. You expect us to live in these places? They're half the size of this house. Some are in questionable neighborhoods. They're safe, clean, and within your budget based on your current income, I replied. If you want something more upscale, you'll both need to find better-paying jobs. A crack of thunder punctuated my statement, and the rain intensified. Despite my resolve, I felt a pang of guilt seeing my parents standing there getting soaked. The little girl inside me, the one who had always sought their approval, who had been raised to respect and obey, whispered that I was being cruel, heartless, a bad daughter. I pushed the voice aside. You should go before the storm gets worse. The hotel is expecting you. We can talk again in a few days when everyone's had time to process. You would put your own parents out on the street? In a storm? My mother's voice rose in genuine distress. I'm not putting you on the street. I've provided shelter and financial support to help you transition. I took a deep breath. But I won't allow you back into my home after what you tried to do. Actions have consequences, Mom. Even yours. My father, who had been silently fuming while examining the apartment listings, suddenly crumpled the papers in his fist. Your grandfather would be ashamed to see what you've become, turning your back on family. He built everything he had from nothing, and he never would have treated his parents this way. The invocation of my beloved grandfather, my father's father, who had passed away when I was in college, was a calculated blow. Grandpa Wilson had been my champion, the one who had encouraged my interest in computers when my parents dismissed it as a phase. He had secretly helped fund my education when my parents insisted I major in elementary education instead of computer science. Actually, I said quietly, Grandpa Wilson is exactly why I'm doing this. He taught me that respect is earned, not commanded. That we teach people how to treat us by what we accept from them, and that sometimes the strongest love is the kind that enforces boundaries. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across my father's face. He had never fully understood the bond between his father and me, the private conversations we'd had during my teenage years when Grandpa would pick me up for our monthly lunches. He didn't know that his father had confided in me about the controlling tendencies he regretted not addressing earlier in his son. Your car keys are in the envelope, too, I continued. I've called an Uber to take me to Zoe's place. I'll be staying there for a few days. I nodded toward their sedan. You should get going before this gets worse. As if to emphasize my point, another lightning bolt fractured the sky, followed almost immediately by a clap of thunder that vibrated in my chest. The storm was directly overhead now. My mother looked at my father, then back at me. Elena, please reconsider. We're your parents. We only want what's best for you. No, I said gently. You want what's easiest for you. There's a difference. Something in my tone must have finally convinced them that I wouldn't budge. My father turned abruptly, grabbed one of the suitcases, and stalked toward their car. My mother lingered a moment longer, her expression cycling through hurt, confusion, and something that might have been the dawning of understanding. This isn't like you, Elena, she said finally. You've always been such a good girl. I'm not a girl anymore, Mom. I'm a woman who's finally standing up for herself. I softened my voice slightly. I do love you both. That hasn't changed. But the way we relate to each other has to change. She nodded slowly, then turned to join my father, who was aggressively shoving the suitcases into the trunk. As they pulled out of the driveway, I noticed my father wouldn't look at me. But my mother watched me through the passenger window until they turned the corner and disappeared. Only then did I allow my shoulders to slump. the adrenaline that had kept me upright and articulate draining away all at once. I sat heavily on the porch steps, heedless of the rain, and buried my face in my hands. "That was intense," came a voice from nearby. "You okay?" I looked up to see Aidan Bradford, my medical resident neighbor, standing a few feet away with an umbrella. He held it out, covering me from the downpour. "I'm fine," I said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, no, I'm not fine, but I will be." He nodded, seeming to accept this. I couldn't help overhearing. Your dad has quite the projecting voice." I winced. "How much did you hear?" "Enough to piece together that they were staying with you and things went south." He shifted awkwardly. "For what it's worth, I think you handled it really well. Standing up to family isn't easy." "No," I agreed. "It isn't." A car pulled into the driveway. My Uber had arrived. I stood, brushing off my soaked pants in a futile gesture. "Thanks for the umbrella coverage," I said, attempting a smile. "And sorry about my dad confronting you about your music. That wasn't my idea." Aidan shrugged. "No worries. I figured as much. You've always been a considerate neighbor." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything while you're dealing with all this, let me know. I'm usually up at weird hours anyway because of my schedule." His kindness, offered without obligation or judgment, nearly broke the composure I was desperately maintaining. I nodded quickly and hurried to the waiting car, Zoe's address already entered in the app. My best friend was waiting at her apartment. Daughter when I arrived, taking one look at my bedraggled state before wordlessly pulling me into a hug. "You did it," she said when she finally released me. "You actually stood up to them." "I changed the locks on my parents," I said, the reality of what I'd done finally hitting me full force. "What kind of daughter does that make me?" Zoe steered me toward her couch, wrapping a throw blanket around my shoulders. "It makes you a daughter who finally realized that being a good daughter doesn't mean being a doormat." She disappeared into her kitchen, returning moments later with 2 steaming mugs of tea. "Tell me everything." Over the next hour, I recounted the confrontation, the things we'd said, the expressions on my parents' faces. Zoe listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or squeezing my hand in support. "The worst part," I concluded, "is that despite everything they did, the rules, the takeover, the attempt to sell my house, there's still this voice inside me saying I'm the villain in this story, that I've failed some fundamental test of daughterly devotion." "That's because they programmed that voice," Zoe replied matter-of-factly. "They installed it from the time you were old enough to understand words. Good girls obey, good daughters sacrifice, family comes first, even if it destroys you. It's going to take time to reprogram that voice." I sipped my tea, letting her words sink in. But what if they're right? What if I am selfish? They did lose everything, and I have this big house all to myself. "Elena." Zoe set her mug down firmly. "Helping family in crisis is one thing. Being manipulated and taken advantage of is another. You offered them shelter when they needed it. You supported them financially. You tolerated their increasing demands for months. And how did they repay you? By trying to sell your home without your consent." When she put it that way, the situation seemed clearer, yet doubt still nagged at me. "But still, they're my parents. And they're adults," Zoe countered. "Fully capable adults who have options. Options you've generously provided for them, I might add. They chose to try to take over your life instead of rebuilding their own. That's on them, not you." My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it, expecting to see my mother's name, but instead found a message from an unknown number. "Ms. Wilson, this is Barbara Winters, the real estate agent. I want to sincerely apologize for my role in today's misunderstanding. Your parents gave me the impression that you were on board with listing the property. Had I known otherwise, I never would have proceeded." Again, My deepest apologies. I showed the message to Zoe, who raised her eyebrows. Well, at least one person recognizes. They crossed a line. That's something. Another text arrived, this one from my mother. We've checked into the hotel. Your father is still very upset. Please call when you're ready to discuss this sensibly. Love, Mom. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing. No apology. Just an implication that my actions were the insensible ones needing discussion. I silenced my phone and set it aside. They still don't get it, I sighed. They might never fully get it, Zoe said gently. That's the hard truth about standing up to family patterns. Sometimes the change has to come entirely from you, not because they've suddenly seen the light. We spent the rest of the evening watching comfort movies and ordering takeout, carefully avoiding further discussion of my parents. But as I settled into Zoe's guest room that night, my mind returned to the confrontation, replaying moments and questioning my choices. Had I been too harsh? Should I have given them more warning? Would a simple conversation have been enough to change their behavior? The doubts circled like vultures, picking away at my certainty. I opened my email, hoping for distraction, and found a message from my company's HR department confirming approval of my request for a week of emergency personal leave. At least work wouldn't be an additional stress while I navigated this situation. Unable to sleep, I pulled out my laptop and began searching for resources on adult children setting boundaries with parents. The results were enlightening. Article after article described situations similar to mine. Well-meaning but controlling parents, adult children struggling with guilt, the complex dance of separation and connection that defined healthy adult family relationships. One passage in particular caught my attention. When we set boundaries with parents who have never respected them, their initial reaction is often one of shock, anger, or hurt. This doesn't mean your boundaries are wrong. It means they're working. For the first time, you're requiring a different type of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than authority and compliance. This transition is rarely smooth, but it's necessary for authentic connection between adults. I read those words over and over, feeling something settle inside me. What I had done wasn't cruel or ungrateful. It was necessary, not just for my well-being, but for any hope of a healthier relationship with my parents going forward. With that realization, I finally drifted off to sleep. Morning brought rain-washed skies and a surprising sense of peace. I made coffee in Zoe's kitchen, planning to spend the day working remotely and researching resources for my parents. Despite everything, I did want them to land on their feet. My goal wasn't punishment, but boundary setting. My phone, which I had finally unmuted, chimed with a text. This time it was from Aiden, my neighbor. Hope this isn't weird, but wanted to check if you're okay after yesterday. Also, FYI, someone who looked like your dad was at your house earlier trying to peek in windows. He left when I came outside to get my mail. My momentary peace evaporated. Of course my father wouldn't accept the new reality so easily. His pattern had always been to push harder when met with resistance, to double down rather than reflect. I texted back, "Thanks for letting me know. If you see him again, please text me. I may need to call the police if this continues." The police. The thought of involving law enforcement against my own father made my stomach churn. Yet what choice did I have if he escalated? What would he do next if peeking in windows didn't work? My phone rang, my mother calling. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Elena," she began without preamble. "We need to talk about your father's medications. They're in the bathroom cabinet, and with his heart condition, I packed all of your medications in the toiletry bag in the blue suitcase," I interrupted. "They should be clearly labeled." "Oh." She sounded momentarily thrown off script. "Well, there's also the matter of our mail. It's been coming to your address for months now. Important documents. I've already arranged for mail forwarding to the hotel for now. Once you have a permanent address, you can update it again." I had thought of everything, anticipating these attempts to regain access to my home. A long pause followed. "Elena," she finally said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Your father isn't taking this well. His blood pressure. I'm worried about his health. This stress isn't good for him. Maybe if you could just let us come back temporarily, while we sort things out more gradually." "Mom," I cut in firmly, "I understand you're concerned about Dad, but his health isn't a bargaining chip. If he's having medical issues, you should take him to a doctor, not try to manipulate me with worry." "Manipulate?" Her voice rose in genuine-sounding offense. "I would never. I'm simply telling you the truth. Your actions have consequences." "To Elena." And there it was, the subtle shifting of responsibility, the emotional leverage, the implied guilt. Tactics that had worked countless times throughout my life. "Yes, they do," I agreed calmly. "And I'm prepared for those consequences. I hope Dad feels better soon. I'll check in tomorrow to see how your apartment hunting is going." I ended the call before she could respond, my hand trembling slightly, but my resolve intact. Setting. Boundaries with words was one thing. Maintaining them in the face of escalating pressure was another challenge entirely. Throughout the day, the texts and calls continued. My father, having apparently recovered from his health crisis, left a voicemail demanding, "I stop this childish nonsense immediately." My mother sent increasingly guilt-laden messages about family loyalty and the approaching Mother's Day. Even my aunt, my mother's sister in Phoenix, whom I spoke to maybe twice a year, called to tell me how disappointed she was in my cruel treatment of my elderly parents, though neither was over 65. The family mobilization was predictable, but still jarring. How quickly the narrative had spread that I was the villain, they the victims. No mention of their attempted property theft, their escalating demands, their complete disregard for my autonomy. In the story being circulated throughout my extended family, I had simply thrown my poor, homeless parents onto the street out of selfish pride. "Classic Darvo," Zoe commented when I showed her the latest text from my cousin. "Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. They're flipping the script to make themselves the injured parties." "It's working," I sighed. "Half my family thinks I'm a monster now." "Half your family hasn't bothered to ask your side of the story," she corrected. "Anyone who matters will at least hear you out before judging." As if on cue, my phone rang. Again. This time, it was my Uncle Robert, my father's younger brother, who had always been something of a black sheep in the family due to his decision to pursue art instead of the family construction business. I answered warily. "Hello, Uncle Robert." "Elena." His deep voice was neutral, neither accusatory nor immediately supportive. "I hear there's been some trouble between you and your parents." I braced myself for another lecture. "You could say that." He paused. "Your dad called me ranting about ungrateful children and modern disrespect. Your mom texted about cruel eviction and health concerns." Another pause. "What I haven't heard is your side." The simple acknowledgement that I might have a legitimate perspective nearly brought me to tears. "It's complicated," I began. "I've got time," he replied. "And I've got coffee, and 30 years of experience dealing with my big brother's particular approach to family dynamics." For the next hour, I explained everything: the initial agreement, the gradual takeover, the expanding rules, and finally, the attempted house sale. Uncle Robert listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement, but reserving judgment. When I finished, the line was quiet for so long that I thought we might have disconnected. "Uncle Robert, are you still there?" "I'm here," he said finally. "Just processing. It's like history repeating itself." "What do you mean?" He sighed heavily. "Your dad did something similar to your grandparents once. Did you know that?" "No," I said, genuinely surprised. What happened? After I moved out to pursue art, your grandparents converted my old bedroom into a studio for your grandmother's quilting. When your parents got married, they lived with your grandparents for what was supposed to be 3 months while saving for a down payment. He chuckled wryly. 3 months turned into 2 years. By the end, your father had convinced Grandma to give up her quilting room because they needed the space more, had rewritten the household budget to his specifications, and had even tried to persuade your grandfather to add him to the deed. The parallels were startling. What happened? Your grandfather put his foot down, told them it was time to find their own place. Your father didn't speak to him for months afterward, claimed he'd been betrayed by his own family. Uncle Robert's voice softened. Sound familiar? Very, I admitted. But they did reconcile eventually, right? I never sensed any tension between Dad and Grandpa growing up. They did, but only after your father accepted that he couldn't control your grandfather's house or life. It took time, but eventually, he recognized the boundaries. He paused meaningfully. Your father responds to strength, Elena. Always has. He pushes until someone pushes back decisively. The conversation with Uncle Robert was illuminating, providing context for my father's behavior that I'd never considered. It didn't excuse what my parents had done, but it helped me understand the pattern at work. A pattern that would continue unless broken decisively. So, you don't think I overreacted? I asked tentatively. On the contrary, he replied. I think you responded to an extreme situation with appropriate firmness. The question now is whether you can maintain that boundary with consistency while still leaving room for a relationship to evolve on new terms. After we hung up, I sat quietly, absorbing his insights. For the first time since the confrontation, I felt completely certain of my actions. Not because they were easy or comfortable, but because they were necessary, not just for me, but for any hope of a healthier relationship with my parents. The path forward wouldn't be simple. The texts and calls would likely continue. The family, pressure might increase before it subsided. My parents might need time, perhaps a long time, to recognize the new reality. But I had taken the essential first step. I had changed the locks, literally and figuratively, on a dynamic that no longer served any of us. As evening fell, I stepped onto Zoe's balcony, gazing at the city lights coming alive against the darkening sky. My phone buzzed with yet another message, but for once I didn't immediately reach for it. Whatever it contained, plea, accusation, or guilt trip, could wait. I had reclaimed my house. More importantly, I had reclaimed my power. The journey ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in months, perhaps the first time in my life, I was setting the terms of my own story. And in that moment, standing under the vast open sky with my future uncertain but undeniably my own, I felt something unexpected. Not guilt, not anxiety, but a profound sense of liberation. I had taken the hardest step, standing firm in my own truth despite immense pressure to surrender it. Whatever came next, I would face it on my feet, not on my knees. And that made all the difference. The apartment complex on Riverside Avenue looked nothing like the sterile, depressing place my father had described in his texts. Sunlight glinted off recently washed windows, and planter boxes filled with cheerful marigolds and petunias lined the walkways. A small but well-maintained swimming pool occupied the central courtyard, where 2 elderly residents chatted on lounge chairs. I sat in my car, gathering courage. 1 week had passed since I had changed my locks and sent my parents to the hotel. According to the manager I'd befriended with an anonymous, concerned relative call, they had checked out 2 days ago. My text messages asking about their new address had gone unanswered for days until my mother finally sent coordinates for this meeting. Apartment 204. Come alone. We need to talk. The message had been characteristically cryptic and ominous, designed perhaps to make me feel like I was being summoned to a tribunal rather than invited to visit my parents' new home. Even so, I had responded that I would come, bringing the remainder of their belongings in labeled boxes. As I approached the second-floor apartment, carrying the first of several boxes from my trunk, I noted the neatly swept walkway and a small potted herb garden by the door, signs that my mother was already attempting to make this space her own. I took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened immediately, revealing my mother. Her appearance startled me. In just 1 week, she seemed to have aged years. The carefully maintained hairstyle she had maintained throughout my childhood had given way to a simpler cut. Her designer clothes, remnants of their former lifestyle that she had clung to even after the foreclosure, had been replaced by practical slacks and a plain blouse from a discount retailer. Elena. Her voice was neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile. Come in. I stepped into a compact but pleasant living area flooded with natural light from a large window. The furnishings were sparse, just a small sofa, a coffee table, and a dining set with 2 chairs, but everything was clean and arranged with care. Photos I recognized from their former home adorned the walls, creating a sense of continuity amid the massive change. "Where's Dad?" I asked, setting down the box on the counter that separated the living area from a tiny kitchenette. "At work." She smoothed her hands over her slacks. He picked up additional hours at the warehouse. The manager was impressed with his organization skills. A hint of pride crept into her voice despite the circumstances. "That's good," I said cautiously, unsure of the emotional terrain I was navigating. "This place looks nice. Much better than the photos online suggested." "It's adequate." She glanced around with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Smaller than what we're accustomed to, certainly, but functional." An awkward silence stretched between us. I had prepared for anger, accusations, even tears. Not this strange, subdued version of my mother who seemed neither broken nor combative. "I brought some of your things," I finally said, gesturing to the box. "There are more in the car. Your china, the photo albums from the hallway closet, Dad's tools. I can bring up the rest if you'd like." "That would be helpful," she replied, and I escaped gratefully to retrieve the remaining boxes. When I returned with the last load, I found my mother unpacking the first box, carefully removing bubble wrap from her prized porcelain figurines, delicate dancers and animals she had collected over decades. I had taken special care with these, knowing their significance to her. "You wrapped them properly," she observed, sounding faintly surprised. "Of course I did." The implication that I might have been careless with her treasures stung slightly. "I know how much they mean to you." Another silence fell as she continued unpacking, arranging the figurines on a small shelf with practiced precision. I hovered, uncertainly, feeling neither welcome to stay nor dismissed. "Would you like some tea?" she finally asked, closing the now empty box. "I don't have your fancy herbal blends, just regular orange pico. But regular tea is fine," I said quickly, relieved at this small offering of hospitality. As she filled a kettle at the sink, I noticed how she had already arranged the tiny kitchen to maximize its efficiency. Labels marked each cabinet, and a magnetic weekly meal plan adhered to the refrigerator. Some habits died hard, apparently. "So," I ventured, as she set a steaming mug before me and took a seat at the small dining table, "how are you and Dad adjusting?" She wrapped her hands around her own mug as if drawing warmth from it. "Your father is still very angry," she said, directly. "He feels betrayed and humiliated. He believes you've chosen your house over your family." I had expected this. "And what do you think, Mom?" The question seemed to startle her. My mother had spent 40 years aligning her opinions with my father's, presenting a unified front even when I suspected she privately disagreed. Asking for her independent perspective was almost a radical act. She stared into her tea for a long moment. "I think," she said slowly, "that we may have overstepped." The admission, however tentative, caught me off guard. I had prepared for continued defensiveness, not this glimmer of self-awareness. "When we first came to stay with you," she continued, her voice taking on a reflective quality I rarely heard, "I was so frightened. One day we had our home, our standing in the community, our certainty about the future. The next, it was all gone. Your father was shattered by the layoff. His entire identity was tied to that job. And I—" She looked up, meeting my eyes, directly. "I didn't know who I was without the life we'd built." "I understand that," I said softly. "It must have been terrifying." "It was, and your home, your life. It represented stability when everything felt chaotic. I think we—" She hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. "We tried to recreate what we'd lost by taking over what you'd built. It wasn't conscious, at least not at first. But it wasn't right." Her insight stunned me. This wasn't the mother I knew, the woman who deflected criticism, who prioritized appearances over authenticity, who treated introspection as a frivolous indulgence. "What changed, Mom?" I asked. "Why are you telling me this now?" She set down her mug and folded her hands precisely on the table, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "Your Uncle Robert came to see us at the hotel. He had quite a lot to say." I hadn't expected this development. "Uncle Robert visited you?" "He did. Gave your father an earful about history repeating itself, and reminded him rather forcefully about what happened with your grandparents." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Then he turned to me and asked if I was going to spend the rest of my life being Frank Wilson's echo, or if I was finally ready to become Patricia Wilson in her own right." The bluntness of Uncle Robert's challenge made me wince. But my mother's calm recounting suggested she had taken it to heart rather than rejecting it. "That must have been difficult to hear," I ventured. "It was infuriating," she admitted. "I threw him out of our hotel room, called him terrible names, told your father he was no longer welcome in our family." She shook her head at the memory. "But after he left, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said, about the patterns we've created, about the woman I was before I became Mrs. Frank Wilson." She rose suddenly, crossing to a small desk in the corner. From a drawer, she withdrew a thin folder and returned to the table. "Did you know I used to write?" She opened the folder, revealing yellowed pages filled with elegant handwriting. Poetry, mostly, some short stories. I was actually quite good, had several pieces published in literary journals before I met your father. I stared at the pages in shock. In all my years, I had never seen my mother engaged in any creative pursuit beyond her carefully controlled gardening and occasional holiday crafts. I had no idea. "No, you wouldn't have." She traced her fingers over the faded words. "I set it aside when we married. Frank didn't see the point of it, said it was a distraction from building our real life together. I didn't even argue, just packed it away with my maiden name and other youthful indulgences." The revelation of this buried part of my mother's identity shifted something fundamental in how I saw her, not just as my mother or my father's wife, but as a woman with dreams and talents that had been systematically deprioritized in service to others. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. She closed the folder carefully. "Because I want you to understand that I see what happened more clearly now. We didn't just try to take over your house, Elena. We tried to take over your life, to reshape it according to our expectations, just as—" She paused, seeming to gather courage. "Just as we tried to do throughout your childhood." The acknowledgement hung in the air between us, more meaningful than any apology. "When you changed the locks," she continued, "it forced me to face how far we had gone. At first, I was just hurt and angry. But after Robert's visit, after your father took the extra shifts and I was alone here for hours. She gestured around the apartment. I've had time to think about who I want to be in this next chapter, and I don't want to be the woman who smothers her adult daughter because she's afraid of her own emptiness. Tears pricked at my eyes. Mom, I'm not saying your father has reached the same conclusions, she interrupted gently. He's still processing in his own way, but I wanted you to know that I understand why you did what you did, and I'm sorry for my part in pushing you to that point. The apology, though indirect, was sincere. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. Thank you for telling me this. It means a lot. There's something else. She withdrew her hand and straightened her shoulders. I've applied for several positions at local libraries. I had an interview yesterday for a part-time cataloging job. The pay isn't much, but it would supplement your father's income. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. Your organizational skills would be perfect for that. Yes, well, she almost smiled. All those rules and systems have to be good for something, I suppose. We sipped our tea in a silence that felt, if not comfortable, at least less strained than before. Would you like to see the rest of the apartment? She offered, standing. It's not large, but we've made it functional. I followed her through the compact space, a small bedroom with their familiar queen bed, now pressed against the wall to make room for a narrow desk, a bathroom with my mother's toiletries arranged with mathematical precision, a tiny second bedroom that had been set up as a combination guest room and home office, with a pull-out sofa and my father's desktop computer. This is where you'll stay when you visit, my mother said, then caught herself. That is, if you want to visit. I understand if you need time. The assumption that I would someday stay overnight in their new home, that our relationship would heal enough for such normalcy, revealed both her hope and her ongoing struggle to respect boundaries. I chose to focus on the hope. It's a nice setup, I said. You've done a lot with the space. Necessity is the mother of invention, she replied with unexpected humor. Or in this case, the mother of maximizing square footage. As we returned to the living area, I noticed the time. I should probably get going. I have a video conference in an hour. She nodded, walking me to the door. Thank you for bringing our things, and for, she hesitated, for giving me the chance to talk to you today. Of course. I paused, then asked the question that had been hovering beneath our entire conversation. Mom, where do we go from here? She considered this thoughtfully. I think we start small, maybe weekly phone calls, perhaps dinner occasionally, on neutral ground. A flicker of her old precision emerged. Clear boundaries, clearly communicated. It will take time for your father, but... She straightened her shoulders. I'll work on him, and on myself. I'd like that, I said, surprised by how much I meant it. As I turned to leave, she called after me. Elena, your house. It really is beautiful. You've created something wonderful on your own terms. I'm proud of you for that, even if I didn't show it properly. The words, so simple yet so profound, brought a lump to my throat. Thank you, Mom. That means a lot. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in months. The conversation with my mother hadn't magically resolved our complex family dynamics, but it had cracked open a door that had seemed permanently shut. The emergence of Patricia Wilson as a person separate from her role as wife and mother suggested possibilities I had never considered. That perhaps my parents could evolve, that our relationship might transform rather than simply fracture. My phone rang through my car's Bluetooth system. Zoe's name flashed on the display. Hey, I answered, just leaving my parents' new place. And? Did World War III break out, or was it just Cold War tensions? I laughed. Neither, actually. It was different. My mom seems to be having some kind of awakening. Seriously? Patricia, I've never had an original thought that Frank didn't approve first Wilson? I know, it's wild. She talked about writing poetry in her youth, showed me literary journals she was published in, acknowledged that they overstepped with me. I shook my head in continued disbelief. I think Uncle Robert really got through to her. Wow. Zoe sounded genuinely surprised. And your dad? Still at work? Thankfully. Mom says he's still pretty angry, but she's working on him. I sighed. One step at a time, I guess. Progress is progress, Zoe affirmed. Hey, speaking of progress, are you still coming to that networking event tonight? The startup people will be there, and I know you've been wanting to connect about potential contract work. The question jolted me back to my own life and aspirations, the very things that had been gradually smothered during my parents' stay. Definitely. Pick you up at 7? Perfect. Wear that blue blazer that makes you look like a tech goddess. After we hung up, I found myself smiling. Just 3 weeks ago, attending a professional event would have required elaborate negotiations with my parents about car usage, explanations about my career that my father never quite seemed to grasp, and inevitable commentary from my mother about how I was working too much and should focus on meeting someone. Now I could simply go. No explanations, no negotiations, no justifications. The freedom I had reclaimed by changing those locks extended far beyond physical space. It had reclaimed my autonomy, my professional identity, and my right to define my own life according to my own values. When I arrived home, I found a surprise waiting on my porch, my grandmother's antique rocking chair that had been in my parents' possession since her death. A note in my mother's handwriting was attached. Elena, this always belonged to you. Grandma Wilson wanted you to have it. I should have given it to you years ago. It deserves to be in your beautiful home. Mom, tears sprang to my eyes as I ran, my hand over the lovingly restored oak. My grandmother had taught me to read in this chair, had told me stories of brave women who charted their own courses in life. Its return felt symbolic, an acknowledgement of my right to my own space, my own legacy, my own path. Inside, I placed the chair in the corner of my living room where morning light would warm it. For a moment, I simply sat there, rocking gently, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my hands. In this house that was fully mine again, I could almost hear my grandmother's voice. Stand your ground, sweet girl. The hardest fences to mend are the ones you never built in the first place. My phone chimed with a text from Aiden, my neighbor. Haven't seen any parental reconnaissance missions in days. I think the coast is clear. Also, having a small get-together. This weekend if you're interested. Just neighborhood folks, very casual. His friendly outreach reminded me of another aspect of life I had neglected during my parents' occupation. Community connections beyond family. I texted back, thanks for the surveillance updates. Would love to join the get-together. Can I bring anything? As evening approached, I prepared for the networking event, selecting the blue blazer Zoe had recommended along with tailored pants and subtle jewelry. The woman in the mirror looked confident, professional, and unapologetically herself. 6 months of diminishment under my parents' subtle criticisms had taken a toll I hadn't fully recognized until now, as I reclaimed not just my space, but my presence. My phone rang again, an unknown number this time. I answered cautiously. Elena. Wilson. A woman's professional voice came through the speaker. Speaking. This is Marianne Chen from Vertex Solutions. We received your application for the senior consultant position, and I'm calling to schedule an interview. Your portfolio is extremely impressive. I felt a surge of excitement. Vertex was a cutting-edge tech consultancy I had applied to on a whim after the lock-changing incident, during a late-night session of reimagining what my career could become without constant familial undermining. The position represented a significant step up from my current role. More responsibility, more creative control, and substantially better compensation. "I'd be delighted to interview," I replied, maintaining my composure while doing an internal, happy dance. "What times are you considering?" As we arranged the details, I marveled at the synchronicity. Just as I had reclaimed my physical space, new doors were opening in my professional life. The timing didn't feel coincidental but causal, as if the universe was responding to my assertion of boundaries with expanded possibilities. After scheduling the interview for the following week, I finished getting ready for the networking event. Spirits soaring. Whatever happened with my parents going forward, whether my father eventually came around as my mother seemed to be doing, or whether our relationship remained strained, I had taken the crucial step of defining myself separately from their expectations and demands. The journey ahead would undoubtedly include challenges. Healthy boundaries required constant maintenance, especially with people accustomed to ignoring them. My mother's nascent self-awareness was encouraging, but not a guarantee of transformed behavior. My father's anger might linger or even intensify before it subsided. The extended family dynamics would take time to recalibrate. But standing in my home, truly my home again, I felt equal to these challenges. The woman who had changed those locks was stronger than the woman who had allowed them to be gradually claimed by others. Each small act of reclamation had built upon the last, creating a foundation of self-respect that could weather the inevitable storms ahead. As I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, I paused by my grandmother's rocking chair, touching it once more for luck. The wood felt warm beneath my fingers, alive with generations of women who had faced their own battles for autonomy and meaning. "I did it, Grandma," I whispered. "I built the fence, and whatever happens next, I'm standing my ground." Then I stepped outside into the sweet spring evening, locking my door behind me. Not to keep others out, but to protect what I had finally recognized as sacred. The space to become fully myself, on my own terms, in my own time. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is change the locks on a life that no longer serves us. And sometimes, in that brave act of closure, we open the door to possibilities we never imagined possible. The interview at Vertex Solutions had gone even better than I'd hoped. After 3 rounds of increasingly technical discussions, I'd been invited to their sleek downtown office for a final meeting with the executive team. As I stood in the elevator, watching the floor numbers climb, I marveled at how quickly life could change direction when you finally removed the obstacles holding you back. It had been exactly 1 month since I changed my locks. 1 month of reclaiming not just my physical space, but my mental and emotional freedom. The weekly calls with my mother had continued as planned, each one slightly less awkward than the last. She had secured the part-time position at the library and seemed genuinely enthusiastic about returning to a workplace after decades as a homemaker. My father, however, remained a complicated absence in this new arrangement. He refused to come to the phone during my calls with my mother, and according to her carefully neutral updates, he was still processing the situation. I understood this to mean he was still angry, still hurt, and still unwilling to acknowledge any role in what had happened. The elevator doors opened onto Vertex's reception area, all glass and brushed steel with stunning views of the city skyline. I squared my shoulders, adjusted my portfolio, and stepped forward to meet whatever came next. 3 hours later, I practically floated back to my car, clutching an official offer letter with a compensation package that exceeded my expectations. Senior technical consultant at one of the most innovative firms in the region, a position that would challenge me, value my expertise, and significantly increase my professional standing. I couldn't wait to tell Zoe. As I pulled into my driveway, my celebratory mood dimmed slightly at the sight of a familiar blue sedan parked across the street. My father's car. My pulse quickened as I scanned the area, half expecting to see him, attempting another window reconnaissance mission, but the vehicle was empty. A text from Aiden confirmed my suspicion. Your dad's been sitting on your porch for about 30 minutes. Didn't look aggressive, just waiting. Want me to check on things? I texted back a quick thanks but assured him I could handle it. After taking a moment to gather myself, I exited my car and approached my home. My father sat on the porch steps, his posture stiff and formal, as if he were waiting for a business appointment rather than sitting outside his daughter's house. He'd aged visibly in the month since I'd last seen him, the lines around his mouth deeper, his hair seeming grayer under the afternoon sun. He wore what I recognized as his interview suit, now slightly too large for his frame, suggesting he'd lost weight. "Dad?" I said as I reached the bottom of the steps. "This is unexpected." He cleared his throat, standing automatically. Frank Wilson had never been comfortable in seated conversations. Standing gave him the height advantage he relied on in negotiations. "Elena." We regarded each other silently, the gap between us filled with a month's worth of unspoken words. Finally, he spoke again. "Your mother suggested I should come." His tone made it clear this wasn't entirely his idea. "She seems to think we need to clear the air." I nodded, unsurprised that my mother was the catalyst for this meeting. "Would you like to come inside? Or would you prefer to talk out here?" The question, acknowledging that entry to my home, was now something I controlled, something he needed. Permission for clearly struck a nerve. His jaw tightened, but he managed a curt nod. "Inside would be appropriate. What I have to say shouldn't be neighborhood entertainment." I unlocked the door, with my new keys, a detail he surely noticed, and led him into the living room. The space had continued its transformation since my parents' departure. I'd rearranged furniture to my preference, replaced some of the heavier drapes they'd insisted on with light, gauzy curtains, and reclaimed my home office as a proper workspace. My grandmother's rocking chair now occupied a place of honor by the window, with a colorful throw I'd purchased specifically to complement it. My father's eyes tracked these changes, his expression unreadable. I gestured for him to sit, taking a seat across from him rather than adjacent, creating a deliberate space between us. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" I offered, keeping my tone neutral. "No." He settled his hands on his knees, a gesture I recognized from childhood family meetings where he would deliver some announcement or verdict. "I'll be direct. Elena, your mother thinks I need to apologize to you." The phrasing was telling. Not that he believed he should apologize, but that my mother thought so. Still, it was a start. "And what do you think, Dad?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. Like my mother, he was unaccustomed to having his opinions questioned so directly by me. He shifted in his seat, the leather of my sofa creaking beneath him. "I think," he said slowly, "that this situation has been difficult for everyone. Your mother and I lost everything. Our home, my career, our standing in the community. We came to you for help, and you changed the locks when you tried to sell my house without my knowledge or consent," I finished calmly. "Yes, that's accurate." His face flushed slightly. "That was a misunderstanding. We were simply exploring options that would benefit everyone." "Benefit everyone? Or benefit you at my expense?" I maintained eye contact, refusing to be the first to look away. "You didn't consult me. You didn't include me in a decision about my own property. You brought in a real estate agent and were discussing listing my home while I wasn't even present." "We are your parents," he said, as if this single fact should override all other considerations. "We were looking out for your best interests, as we always have." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this conversation needed to remain productive. Getting drawn into the same circular arguments would solve nothing. "Dad, I understand that losing your job and your home was devastating. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been for you. That's why I opened my home to you both without hesitation." I leaned forward slightly, but somewhere along the way, hospitality turned into hostility. My home became a battleground of rules and restrictions. My autonomy as an adult was systematically undermined, and ultimately, you attempted to take control of my largest financial asset without my consent. He opened his mouth to object, but I held up a hand, surprising both of us with my assertiveness. Please let me finish. I'm not saying this to hurt you or to place blame. I'm saying it because we can't move forward if we can't acknowledge what actually happened. Something in my tone must have registered, because he closed his mouth and gave a terse nod. I never wanted to put you and Mom out on the street. I continued. I provided alternatives, paid for temporary accommodations, researched affordable apartments, gave you funds to secure housing. I packed your belongings carefully. I've continued to check in on Mom weekly. These aren't the actions of someone who doesn't care about family. My father's expression remained stoic, but I noticed a subtle shift in his posture, a slight lessening of the rigid defensiveness he'd maintained since arriving. Your mother seems different, he said finally, changing tack. Since we moved to the apartment. She's been talking about writing again, applied for jobs without consulting me first, started making decisions independently. He sounded genuinely perplexed by this development. She says it's time she found her own voice again, says Uncle Robert reminded her of who she used to be. I suppressed a smile, picturing my mother's gradual re-emergence as an independent person, separate from her role as my father's wife. And how do you feel about that? He frowned as if the question hadn't occurred to him. It's unsettling. After 40 years of marriage, to suddenly have your wife announce she's joining a writing group and rearranging her schedule without checking with you first. Sounds like Mom is setting some boundaries of her own, I observed, quietly. My father's eyes narrowed at the word boundaries, but he didn't immediately dismiss it as I expected. Instead, he was silent for a long moment, seeming to choose his words with uncharacteristic care. Your grandfather once told me something, he said finally. After your mother and I had overstayed our welcome in his home. He said, Frank, there's a difference between supporting family and suffocating them. I was too proud to listen then. He met my eyes directly. Maybe I'm still too proud, but seeing your mother change, hearing her talk about feeling smothered all these years. He shook his head. It's made me wonder what else I might have been wrong about. The admission, however oblique, startled me. Frank Wilson didn't acknowledge being wrong, not about business decisions, not about household matters, certainly not about his approach to family dynamics. That's a significant reflection, Dad. Don't misunderstand, he said quickly, some of his old defiance returning. I still think you handled the situation poorly, changing locks on your parents for God's sake. There were more respectful ways to address your concerns. Like what? I challenged. I had tried talking. I had tried compromising. Nothing changed except that the rules multiplied and my space continued to shrink. What would you have suggested as an alternative? He had no immediate answer, which was itself remarkable. Frank Wilson always had an answer, a solution, a directive. I suppose, he said finally, that I'm not entirely sure, and that's uncomfortable for me to admit. The vulnerability in this statement was so unexpected that I momentarily didn't know how to respond. This wasn't the confrontation I had anticipated, my father raging about ungrateful children and demanding an apology. This was something more nuanced, more human. Dad, I said carefully, I think we're both navigating unfamiliar territory here. You're used to being the authority, the provider, the one with the answers. I'm used to being the dutiful daughter who accommodates even when it costs me. But those roles don't work anymore. They haven't for a long time. So what exactly are you proposing? He asked, the businessman in him seeking definable terms. I'm proposing a reset, not erasing what happened, but moving forward with new awareness. You and Mom are establishing a new life in the apartment. I'm continuing to build my career here. I hesitated, then added, Actually, I received a job offer today. Senior technical consultant at Vertex Solutions. Something flickered across his face. Pride, perhaps, before it was subsumed by his habitual reserve. That's significant. Congratulations. Thank you. I smiled, allowing myself to feel the achievement despite the tension of our conversation. My point is, we're all in transition. Maybe instead of clinging to old patterns, we can create new ones that respect everyone's independence while maintaining connection. My father was silent for so long that I wondered if he'd even heard me. Finally, he sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to come from somewhere beneath the polished exterior he presented to the world. Your mother said almost the same thing yesterday. That perhaps it was time to replace control with respect. He straightened his tie, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. I'm not sure I know how to do that, Elena. I've operated a certain way my entire adult life. I don't think any of us has all the answers, I admitted, but being willing to try seems like a good start. He nodded slowly, then reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. I was prepared for this meeting to go very differently, he said, holding it out to me. I had a whole speech prepared about family obligation and respect for elders, but now… He shook his head. Now I'm not certain of anything except that change is apparently inevitable, whether I approve of it or not. I took the envelope cautiously. What is this? Open it, he said. Inside was a check, not for a large amount, but significant, given my parents' current financial situation. The memo line read, First repayment, hotel and apartment funds. Dad, this isn't necessary. It is, he interrupted firmly. Your mother and I discussed it. We accepted your financial assistance in a crisis, but we don't intend to remain dependents. We will repay what you provided, in installments as we're able. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. Your mother said it was important for our dignity and your boundaries. Something about not allowing financial entanglement to complicate our relationship going forward. I recognized my mother's emerging wisdom in this approach, the practical application of her new perspective on healthy family dynamics. I appreciate this, I said, carefully folding the check back into the envelope. Not because I need the money, but because of what it represents. My father nodded, seeming to understand. He stood, signaling the conclusion of our meeting with the same formality that had characterized its beginning. I should go. Your mother is expecting me to help with some furniture assembly this evening. Apparently, she's converting part of our bedroom into what she calls a writing nook. I walked him to the door, the space between us still charged with unresolved emotions, but somehow less adversarial than when he'd arrived. On the porch, he paused, looking out at the neighborhood where he and my mother had briefly attempted to establish a new dominion. This is a good home, Elena, he said finally. You've built something solid here, something to be proud of. Coming from my father, a man who had spent his career assessing the value and potential of properties, this simple acknowledgement carried unexpected weight. Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. He nodded once more, then descended the steps and walked to his car without looking back. I watched until the blue sedan turned the corner, then went back inside, closing the door on what felt like the end of one chapter and the tentative beginning of another. Later that evening, as I sat in my grandmother's rocking chair reviewing the details of my new job offer, my phone chimed with a text from my mother. Your father told me about your visit. He didn't say much, but he seemed thoughtful afterward. This is progress. Also, congratulations on the new position. I always knew you were meant for important work. Perhaps you could tell me more about it during our call this Sunday? Much love, Mom. The message brought an unexpected smile to my face. Not just for its warm acknowledgement of my professional achievement. something my mother had often downplayed in the past in favor of questioning my personal life, but for the respectful way it suggested rather than assumed our next conversation. Much had changed in a month. My mother was rediscovering her voice and identity. My father was confronting the limitations of his authoritarian approach to family. And I was learning that setting boundaries didn't necessarily mean severing connections. It meant establishing the conditions under which those connections could be healthy rather than harmful. My phone rang, pulling me from my reflections. It was Aiden. "Just checking that everything went okay with your dad," he said when I answered. "I saw him leave earlier, but you've been radio silent since." His concern touched me. In the weeks since my parents' departure, we'd gradually developed a friendship beyond the basic neighborly acquaintance we'd maintained before. He'd attended Zoe's housewarming party the previous weekend, fitting seamlessly into my small circle of friends, with his self-deprecating humor and thoughtful observations. It went surprisingly well, actually, I told him. Not perfect, but better than I expected. We might be finding a way forward. "That's great news," he said warmly. "Hey, a group of us are grabbing dinner at that new Thai place on Maple Street to celebrate Ryan's promotion. Want to join? We're meeting in about an hour." In the past, such a spontaneous invitation would have required complex negotiations at home, explaining where I was going, who would be there, when I'd return, all while enduring subtle but pointed commentary about priorities and proper planning. Now the only consideration was my own desire. "I'd love to," I said, feeling a rush of simple joy at the freedom to accept an impromptu dinner invitation without justification or apology. "Text me the exact address?" After we hung up, I went to change for dinner, catching sight of myself in the bedroom mirror. The woman reflected there bore little resemblance to the diminished version who had tiptoed around her own home a month earlier, deferring to rules posted on her own refrigerator. This woman stood taller, smiled more easily, moved with the confidence of someone comfortable in her skin and certain of her worth. The locks I had changed weren't just on my doors, I realized. They were on my heart, my mind, my sense of self. By securing my physical boundaries, I had created the space to strengthen my emotional ones as well. As I selected a favorite dress from my closet, one my mother had once called too bold for a woman my age, I thought about the journey of the past month. It hadn't been easy. There had been tears, doubts, lonely nights when the weight of familial expectation and generational patterns had threatened to crush my resolve. Times when the voice of the good daughter had whispered that I was selfish, ungrateful, wrong to prioritize my needs above my parents' comfort. But with each passing day, as I reclaimed my space and redefined my relationships on more equitable terms, those whispers had grown fainter. In their place had emerged a stronger, clearer voice, my own voice, affirming my right to self-determination and healthy boundaries. The doorbell rang, Aiden arriving to walk with me to his car for the short drive to the restaurant. As I grabbed my purse and keys, I paused briefly beside my grandmother's rocking chair, touching its worn arm for luck as had become my habit. "Progress, Grandma," I murmured. "Not perfection, but progress." And really, isn't that the most we can ask of any relationship? Not that it be perfect, but that it grow toward greater health and mutual respect? My parents might never fully understand or appreciate my boundaries. My father might always harbor some resentment about how events had unfolded. But small steps in the right direction still represented movement toward healing. As I locked my door behind me, securing my home as I now secured my sense of self, I felt a profound gratitude for the difficult but necessary journey of the past months. By changing those locks, I had opened the door to a life defined by choice rather than obligation, by authentic connection rather than imposed expectation. Sometimes the most meaningful relationships are the ones we rebuild after they break, not as they were before, but as they should have been all along. And sometimes the most important rooms we reclaim aren't the physical spaces of our homes, but the internal landscapes of our hearts and minds, where we finally assert our right to live according to our own best wisdom. As I joined Aiden and headed toward an evening of friendship and celebration, I carried this understanding with me like a talisman, a reminder that healthy boundaries aren't walls that isolate, but foundations that support the construction of a life worth living, relationships worth having, and a self worth honoring. Sometimes changing the locks is just the beginning of the story, not its end. And what comes after? The difficult conversations, the uncomfortable growth, the gradual rebuilding is where the real transformation occurs. Not just in how others treat us, but in how we come to recognize and honor our own worth. 6 months had passed since that rainy afternoon when I changed my locks. 6 months of rebuilding boundaries, redefining relationships, and reclaiming my sense of self. As I stood in my kitchen preparing appetizers for the housewarming party that evening, I could scarcely believe how much had changed in such a relatively short time. The senior technical consultant position at Vertex Solutions had exceeded my expectations. The challenging projects had pushed me to expand my skills, while the collaborative culture had provided the professional respect I'd craved. 3 months in, I'd been assigned to lead a high-profile client implementation, a vote of confidence that had boosted not just my resume, but my sense of professional worth. The financial benefits had been substantial as well. With my increased salary and quarterly performance bonuses, I'd been able to accelerate my mortgage payments and still have enough to complete the kitchen renovation I'd been planning before my parents' arrival had derailed everything. The new quartz countertops gleamed under the pendant lights I'd installed myself, and the soft gray cabinetry perfectly complemented the subway tile backsplash. My phone chimed with a text from Zoe. "On my way, bringing that artisanal cheese you. Love and another bottle of Prosecco. Can't wait to see the finished kitchen." I smiled, typing back a quick reply before returning to my preparations. Zoe had been my rock throughout this journey, the friend who had offered her spare room when I needed space, who had validated my boundaries when doubt crept in, who had celebrated each small victory in reclaiming my life. The guest list for this evening was intentionally small. Just my closest friends, a few colleagues from Vertex who had become friends outside of work, and some neighbors, including Aiden, whose friendship had evolved into something more over the past few months. His thoughtfulness, respect for boundaries, and gentle humor had been a welcome contrast to the relationship patterns I'd observed and internalized growing up. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I wiped my hands on a towel and went to answer, finding Aiden on my porch with a potted plant in his arms. "Housewarming gift," he explained with a grin. "Though technically, I guess it's a kitchen warming since you already warmed the house once." "Very thoughtful," I laughed, accepting the beautiful peace lily. "And perfect timing. I just finished setting up the appetizer table." He followed me inside, whistling appreciatively at the transformed kitchen. "It's gorgeous, Elena. Worth every Saturday I heard you wielding power tools over here." "Sorry about the noise," I said, placing the plant on the windowsill where it caught the afternoon light beautifully. "Are you kidding? It was inspiring watching you rebuild this space exactly the way you wanted it." He leaned against the counter, his expression softening. "You know, when I first moved in next door, you were always so apologetic about everything. Your music, having friends over, even using your own driveway. Seeing you claim your space like this." He shook his head admiringly. "It's been pretty amazing to witness." His observation gave me pause. He was right. Before my parents' stay, I had been reflexively apologetic about occupying my own space, a pattern established long before they had moved in. Their presence had merely magnified tendencies already embedded in how I navigated the world. "It's been a journey," I acknowledged. "Not always an easy one, but necessary." "Speaking of journeys," Aiden said, his tone shifting slightly. "Have you decided about tonight? Whether they're coming?" The they in question needed no clarification. After months of weekly phone calls with my mother, gradually increasing, in warmth and genuine connection, she had tentatively asked if she and my father might attend the housewarming. The invitation had caught me off guard, not because it was unwelcome, but because it represented a significant threshold in our evolving relationship. "They're coming," I confirmed. "Mom texted earlier to check if they should bring anything. I told her just themselves." Aiden nodded, looking slightly relieved. He knew how much mental and emotional energy I'd invested in establishing healthier patterns with my parents, and how significant this step was. "That's great. And you're feeling okay about it?" "Surprisingly, yes." I arranged a plate of stuffed mushrooms on the serving tray. "It won't be perfect, but it feels right. They've never seen the kitchen renovation, and Mom genuinely seems excited about it. Even Dad sounded interested when I mentioned the custom cabinetry." The past 6 months had seen gradual but meaningful shifts in my relationship with both parents. My mother had flourished in her library position, advancing quickly to full-time status due to her organizational skills and work ethic. She'd joined a community writing group and had even had a personal essay published in a local literary magazine, an achievement she'd shyly shared during one of our weekly calls. My father's evolution had been slower and less dramatic, but nonetheless, real. The warehouse position had turned into a management role after he'd reorganized their inventory system, increasing efficiency by 30%. While he remained more reserved in our interactions, the aggressive defensiveness had gradually given way to a cautious respect. Our conversations, initially strained and formal, had slowly developed more authentic moments, particularly when discussing business or home improvement projects, neutral territories where his experience and my independence could coexist without conflict. These changes hadn't happened by accident. They had required consistent boundaries, clear communication, and willingness on all sides to create a new kind of relationship. There had been missteps and backsliding, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, when my father's authoritarian tendencies or my mother's enabling habits briefly resurfaced. But with each successfully navigated interaction, the new patterns had strengthened. The doorbell rang again, and I glanced at the clock. Still 45 minutes before the party officially began. "That's probably Zoe," I told Aiden. "She always arrives early to help set up." But when I opened the door, I found my parents standing on the porch. My mother held a small gift bag, and my father carried what appeared to be a toolbox. "We're early," my mother said apologetically. "I told your father we should drive around the block a few times, but he insisted there was no point in wasting gas when we'd just end up here anyway." Typical Frank Wilson logic, practical to a fault, with little allowance for social niceties. But there was something endearing about its familiarity now that it wasn't being imposed as a household mandate. "It's fine," I assured them, stepping back to allow them entry. "Come in. Aiden is already here helping me with last-minute preparations." As they entered, I observed them closely. My mother looked younger somehow, her hair styled in a more modern cut than the rigid coif she'd maintained for decades. She wore a colorful blouse rather than her usual muted tones, and subtle makeup enhanced her features without masking them. My father appeared healthier than when I'd last seen him, his posture straighter and his color better, though he still carried himself with the formal precision that had characterized him my entire life. "Elena," he said with a slight nod, "the house looks well maintained." From anyone else it might have sounded like faint praise, but coming from my father, a man who evaluated buildings professionally for decades, it was high compliment indeed. "Thank you," I replied. "I've been keeping up with the seasonal maintenance schedule you recommended last year. The gutter guards were a good investment." A flicker of pleasure crossed his face at this acknowledgement of his practical advice. My mother, meanwhile, was already moving toward the kitchen, drawn by the visible transformation. "Oh my goodness," she exclaimed, stepping into the space that had once been her domain during their stay. "Elena, It's absolutely beautiful. The colors, the layout, it's exactly what this space needed. Her genuine admiration, freely given without qualification or suggestion for improvement, felt like a small miracle. The Patricia Wilson of a year, Ego would have found something to critique. Some way the renovation could have better aligned with her preferences rather than mine. Thank you, Mom. I designed it myself and did a lot of the work with help from friends. I gestured toward Aiden, who had been watching our interaction with quiet interest. You remember my neighbor, Aiden Bradford, right? A shadow crossed my father's face, no doubt remembering his confrontation with Aiden over music volume during their stay. But to his credit, he extended his hand. Bradford, you're the doctor, correct? Medical resident, Aiden corrected politely, shaking my father's hand firmly. Final year of my emergency medicine program. Demanding profession, my father acknowledged with newfound respect. Long hours, high pressure. It can be, Aiden agreed, but rewarding. As they engaged in surprisingly comfortable small talk about healthcare infrastructure, a topic my father had developed interest in through his warehouse management position at a medical supply company, my mother drew me aside. Elena, she said quietly, offering the gift bag she'd been holding. This is for you. A housewarming gift, though that seems a bit silly given that it's been your house all along. The kitchen is new, I pointed out with a smile, accepting the bag. So kitchen warming is still appropriate. Inside the bag, I found a beautifully bound journal with handmade paper and an elegant fountain pen. It's lovely, Mom. Thank you. Open the cover, she encouraged. I did, finding an inscription in my mother's flowing handwriting. For Elena, who taught me that finding your voice begins with honoring your boundaries. With love and respect, Mom. The simple message, acknowledging both my boundaries and her growth, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. This means a lot, Mom. Thank you. She squeezed my hand, her own eyes glistening. I've been doing a lot of writing these past months, processing, remembering who I was before I became only someone's wife and someone's mother. It's been illuminating. She glanced toward my father, who was still engaged in conversation with Aiden. Your father is trying, in his way. It doesn't come naturally to him, acknowledging others' autonomy, accepting that control is an illusion, but he's learning. I've noticed, I said truthfully. The repayment checks arrive precisely on the first of each month, with meticulous accounting notation. She laughed softly. Yes, that's pure Frank. He approaches emotional growth like a business plan. Organized, strategic, quantifiable where possible. Her expression grew more serious. But don't mistake his formality for lack of change. The Frank Wilson of a year ago would never have entered this house again after what happened. His pride wouldn't have permitted it. I nodded, understanding. The significance. What made the difference, do you think? My mother considered this, absently tracing the pattern on her colorful blouse. Partly seeing me change, I think. It frightened him at first, me having opinions that didn't automatically align with his, making decisions without consultation. But as time passed and I didn't use my independence to leave him, just to be more authentically myself within our marriage, he began to see that relationships can be stronger when both people stand on their own foundations. Her insight surprised me, not because it wasn't true, but because the mother I'd grown up with had never articulated such nuanced understanding of relationship dynamics. That's quite profound, Mom. She smiled, a hint of her new confidence visible. I may have spent decades as your father's echo, but I was always observing, processing. I just didn't trust my own conclusions enough to voice them. She straightened, her shoulders slightly. That's changing now. Before I could respond, my father approached, holding out his toolbox. Elena, I brought something for the house. Maintenance items, high-grade caulk for the bathroom seams, replacement filters. For the HVAC system, a specialty lubricant for the garage door track, all properly organized and labeled. It was such a characteristically Frank Wilson gift. Practical, thoughtful in its own way, focused on preservation rather than decoration. But unlike in the past, it came offered rather than imposed, a suggestion rather than a directive. Thanks, Dad. That's really helpful. I've been meaning to pick up some of those things. He nodded, seemingly pleased that his practical contribution had been received as intended. The kitchen looks well executed, he added, glancing around at the renovation. Professional grade work. You've developed good skills. Coming from a man who had built his career evaluating construction quality, it was high praise indeed. I learned from watching you over the years, I acknowledged. You always said measure twice, cut once. Something shifted in his expression, softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of his perpetually squared shoulders. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the father beneath the patriarch, the man who had once patiently taught me to hammer a nail straight and measure a room for carpet. The doorbell rang again, Zoe this time, laden with bags and immediately filling the space with her vibrant energy. As more guests arrived and the party gained momentum, I observed an interesting phenomenon. My parents gradually integrated into the gathering in ways I couldn't have imagined a year earlier. My mother engaged enthusiastically with my friends, asking thoughtful questions about their work and interests, sharing anecdotes from her library position and writing group without once mentioning marriage prospects or traditional expectations. My father, while more reserved, found common ground with my Vertex colleagues in discussions of operational efficiency and project management, offering insights without attempting to dominate the conversation. They were different people than the ones who had moved into my home a year ago, or perhaps more accurately, they were more authentic versions of themselves, less constrained by rigid roles and expectations. The crisis that had brought them to my doorstep had ultimately forced a reckoning with patterns established over decades. As the evening progressed, I found myself in a quiet moment in the living room, slightly apart from the cheerful buzz of conversation in the kitchen and dining area. My grandmother's rocking chair beckoned, and I sat for a moment, taking in the scene of my transformed home filled with people who respected and valued me as I was. My father approached, holding a glass of the sparkling water he preferred to wine. Your grandmother loved that chair, he observed, nodding toward where I sat. Said she did her best thinking in it. I feel the same way, I admitted. It's become my thinking spot. He nodded, seeming to approve of this continuation. After a moment's hesitation, he spoke again, his voice lower and less certain than usual. Your mother tells me I should acknowledge something to you directly. He cleared his throat. About what happened last year. The rules, the attempt to sell your house. I waited, giving him space to find his words without prompting or pressure. It was wrong, he said finally, the admission clearly costing him. Not just strategically misguided, but fundamentally wrong. Your home is yours. Your life is yours. I lost sight of that distinction. He straightened his tie, a nervous gesture I recognized from childhood. I've never been good at admitting mistakes, Elena. Your mother would tell you that's an understatement. A hint of rueful self-awareness colored his tone. But I was wrong, and I'm sorry. The apology, simple but sincere, represented something I had never expected to hear from Frank Wilson. Not because he was cruel or uncaring, but because his entire identity had been constructed around being the infallible patriarch, the one who directed rather than deferred. Thank you, Dad, I said quietly. That means a lot. He nodded once, seeming both uncomfortable with the vulnerability and relieved to have expressed it. Your home is impressive, he continued, shifting to more familiar territory. Not just the structure, but what you've created here. A life of your own design. That's the goal, I agreed, though it's still evolving. As it should. He glanced around at the gathering, his gaze landing briefly on Aiden, who was helping a friend's toddler build a tower of coasters on the coffee table. He seems decent, respectful. Coming from my father, this constituted enthusiastic approval. He is, I confirmed simply. Good. My father nodded decisively. Well, I should rejoin your mother. She's discussing library cataloging systems with your friend Zoe, and I imagine they could use a practical perspective. I suppressed a smile at his continued certainty that any conversation would benefit from his input. Some things changed, others merely softened around the edges. As he walked away, however, I noticed that he approached the discussion not with his former authoritative interjection, but with a question, asking rather than telling, engaging rather than directing. Progress, not perfection. The party continued, well into the evening, flowing easily from dinner to dessert to comfortable conversation in various corners of my home. When my parents eventually prepared to leave, the goodbyes were warm and authentic, without the tension or performative quality that had characterized our interactions for so long. This was lovely, Elena, my mother said, embracing me at the door. Your home feels so much like you now, warm, thoughtful, elegant in an understated way. Thanks, Mom. I'm glad you could both come. My father, standing slightly behind her, nodded. The kitchen renovation shows excellent craftsmanship. You should be proud. Then, with visible effort toward a more personal connection, he added, perhaps you could visit our apartment next weekend. Your mother has completed her writing nook, and I've installed some shelving in the guest room that I think you'll find efficiently designed. The invitation, awkwardly expressed but genuinely offered, represented another step in our evolving relationship. I'd like that, I told him truthfully. Sunday afternoon? He nodded, satisfied with the concrete plan. 1 o'clock, we'll provide lunch. After they left, the party gradually wound down until only Aiden remained, helping me load the dishwasher and put away leftover food. That went well, he observed, wrapping a plate of cheese and crackers. Your parents seem different from what you described. They are different, I confirmed. We all are. Later, after everything was cleaned and Aiden had returned to his own home next door, I sat alone in my grandmother's rocking chair, reflecting on the journey of the past year. From the desperate phone call that had brought my parents to my doorstep, through the gradual erosion of boundaries, to the breaking point of changing locks, and finally to this evening of genuine connection, it had been a path of profound transformation for all of us. The changes hadn't happened overnight. They hadn't been easy or linear. There had been difficult conversations, painful realizations, moments of doubt and regression. But with each small step, each boundary honored, each authentic exchange, each old pattern interrupted, we had moved toward something healthier. My phone chimed with a text from my mother. Thank you for including us tonight. Your home reflects the remarkable woman you've become. We love you and are proud of you. Mom and Dad. The message brought tears to my eyes, not because it was dramatic or extraordinary, but because it was so ordinary in its expression of parental affection. The kind of message that many adult children received without a second thought. But that represented profound growth in my family context. I typed back, thank you both for coming. It meant a lot to have you there. Looking forward to Sunday lunch. As I set the phone aside and prepared for bed, I thought about the many locks we set and changed throughout our lives. The physical locks on our doors, yes, but also the metaphorical ones. The boundaries we establish, the patterns we secure or disrupt, the ways we protect what matters while allowing appropriate access to our hearts and lives. Changing the locks. On my home had been a dramatic, necessary step in a moment of crisis, but the more meaningful changes had come afterward, in the gradual, intentional rebuilding of relationships on healthier foundations. in my parents' willingness, however imperfect, to recognize me as an autonomous adult with the right to my own space and choices, in my own ability to maintain boundaries while still offering connection. We were works in progress, all of us. My father still defaulted to certainty where humility might better serve. My mother still occasionally slipped into placating habits formed over decades, and I still sometimes questioned my right to prioritize my own needs and preferences. Old patterns didn't disappear. They simply lost their grip as we consciously created new ones. But as I moved through my home, my truly personal space now, every corner reflecting my choices and values, I felt a deep gratitude for the difficult journey that had brought us here. The crisis that had seemed so devastating had ultimately been transformative, forcing a reckoning that might otherwise have been avoided for decades more. Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with those we love most. Sometimes the most painful confrontations lead to the most meaningful growth. And sometimes, changing the locks on our doors opens the way to more authentic relationships than we ever thought possible. As I drifted toward sleep, I remembered something my grandmother had told me long ago, sitting in the very rocking chair that now graced my living room. The truest love doesn't demand surrender, Elena. It invites you to become more fully yourself. In changing those locks, in standing my ground, in reclaiming my space and my voice, I had created the conditions for a more authentic love to emerge, not just between my parents and me, but within myself. The love that comes from honoring your own worth, from recognizing your right to boundaries, from building a life that reflects your truest values. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do, for ourselves and ultimately for others, is to change the locks on doors that no longer serve us, creating spaces where respect replaces control, where authentic connection replaces obligation, where the messy reality of being human is acknowledged rather than denied. And in that challenging, imperfect, beautiful process of reclaiming ourselves, we discover that the most important home we'll ever build isn't made of wood and stone, but of choices and boundaries, of courage and truth, of the daily decisions to honor our own worth while remaining open to genuine connection. That journey never really ends. The renovation continues, room by room, relationship by relationship, day by day. But with each mindful choice, each boundary honored, each authentic exchange, we create homes, both physical and emotional, where we can truly belong, first to ourselves and then to one another. And that, perhaps, is the greatest transformation of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.